Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whenever you're watching this. I don't have my usual American flag in the background. I'm actually at my home right now. This is that Thursday where everything's raining like crazy, and school was effectively canceled as far as in person. So that's why you don't see my usual American flag behind me. But today is where a lot of the things we've been talking about for so long is finally coming to a head. And we're going to see today the dissolution of the Union, a union of states that, again, was consecrated in many ways all the way back to 1776 with the signing of that Declaration of Independence, that loose union of all those, states who wanted to separate themselves from Great Britain, a union that had held through all the troubles and the travails of that 1780s period, where there's all these debates about, are we going to be much more state centric or much more federally centric? And in many ways, we're going back to that debate, and that debate's never went away really ever since that time period. And today is going to be the decisive moment where some of the southern states decide they have other plans in mind when it comes to the future of their own respective regions and what the future of the country should look like. Okay, so a lot of this comes out naturally from the fallout of John Brown's raid, which I talked about last time, which again really was a turning point for the South, because for so long there were all these possibilities of slave uprisings, which were scary enough, going all the way back to the 1830s with like Nat Turner. But now this takes on a new dimension when white people are actively involved in trying to get guns to give over to slaves to help break away. That added a whole new dimension to this. Okay, and because for the longest time it was thought, well, African Americans or slaves couldn't do this on their own. They simply don't have, the numbers or the power for it. But if white people are going to start aiding them in this, that is going to change the dimensions of this. Okay, so the fear of John Brown's raid, which again failed, but the fears that kicks up is going to really send the South into kind of overdrive when it comes to scaring their citizens into kind of getting closer and closer to recession. Now, on paper, Republicans, they denounced John Brown's actions. They said this was the act of a violent man. Even if we're against slavery or free soilers, we don't want slavery in the West, we still don't think that violence is the answer. But hey, Southerners, you're to blame for this, right? It's your whole system that he's rebelling against. It's not some system really by the North. It's a system that is kind of perpetuated by the South, perpetuated by the South. So you're to blame. And again, we don't condone his actions, but it's your fault that it even happened in the first place. Meanwhile, these debates really tear the Democratic Party apart, okay? Because the northern delegates from the Democratic Party, they support popular sovereignty in the Western territories, saying, let these Western states and territories decide for themselves. Meanwhile, the South, they're saying, no, it should be kind of slavery should be upheld. That Dred Scott decision proved, the Supreme Court ruled that free slaves or African Americans, or free African Americans or slaves are both subject to non-citizenship, that they're not equal members of society. So they're saying, no, absolutely not. Slavery should exist and abound all across. Okay. Stephen Douglas failed to get enough votes at the first convention to be the Democratic nominee for president, which prompts actually a second one in Baltimore. Excuse me. First one's held in Charleston. A second one's held in Baltimore. And the Democratic Party at this time is really, again, threatens to be torn apart, because you have Democrats of the North who in general are for slavery, but they realize that, hey, we're in a little bit more northern states. We kind of got to kowtow to their pressures. But in the South, meanwhile, they're all for slavery by any means necessary, right? So that division of simple geography, again, really threatens to tear the Democratic Party apart. Again, especially those northern delegates are really only for popular sovereignty. Meanwhile, the southern ones are much more adamant about slavery needing to exist. So in the South, they're going to hold their own convention and nominate current president or vice president, that is, John C. Breckinridge from Kentucky. And he was made a big deal about, I support the Dred Scott decision. And not only that, I want to establish new slave codes in Western lands. So this is really one that Southern Democrats could get behind, because he really represented pretty acutely the concerns of a South that feels quite naturally their pressure starting to slip away. Okay. So the Republican Party realized that their candidate needed to sweep the North. That if we don't win every single northern state, that's going to be a big problem for us because we all know that the South is going to go purely Democratic, right? Because the Democratic Party is the party of slavery, and so we all know that they're going to be very much tied to slavery in any form. So they realized we have no chance of winning the South, which means we need one person who's going to be able to unite the whole Northern coalition. And there is going to be a pretty prominent Republican of that era. He had been around for a while, Senator William Seward from New York, but he didn't have wide enough of an appeal. He was a smart guy. He's actually going to serve in the future president's cabinet here in a little bit, but he just doesn't have that appeal, that popularity, that kind of ability to kind of mix it up with the average public in the way that the guy that they do find is. Because at the Chicago convention, they're going to get behind and choose Abraham Lincoln. Now, it makes sense Chicago would do this, right? Chicago's in Illinois. Lincoln is, in many ways, the son of Illinois. He's a natural choice. And many of these delegates, the Republican delegates of the North, realized that, hey, those debates he had with Douglas made him very popular, especially in the North, right? The South feared him, but the Northern states really got behind and supported Lincoln in that endeavor. Now, in 1858, again, he lost that Senate, race for Senate to Stephen Douglas. So he technically lost in that one. But they say, hey, this might be the guy here in 1860 that can deliver us to the White House and can maybe start to change some things. Okay. So Republicans are fighting really hard with Lincoln and with the kind of their platform in 1860 that they are not that they're more than an anti-slavery party, that they don't want to just get rid of slavery, that they're a lot more than that. And indeed, they're much more focused on deeming themselves free soilers. We don't want slavery in the West than to totally get rid of slavery in the South. That's a key important distinction to make. They're not quite there just yet, wanting to abolish all slavery. They're more trying to focus on, hey, we're free soilers. We don't want slavery in the West. So again, Lincoln and the Republican Party in 1860, as I said, they denounced John Brown's raid. They reaffirmed the rights of Southern states to preserve slavery within their own borders. So they're saying, listen, we're not trying to take slavery away from Southern states. We're just wanting to make sure slavery doesn't expand west. We want higher tariffs. We want a new homestead law for Western settlers, and we want to invest in the Transcontinental Railroad. So again, they're fighting really, really hard to make sure that we're not just kind of identified as an anti-slavery party. There's more to us than that. And so as I said, Douglas and Breckinridge, that's really going to split the Democratic Party in half and just makes it all the easier for Lincoln to win election in 1860. So Lincoln does win that election in part because Douglas and Breckinridge split the Democratic vote in the North and deliver that to Lincoln. And so they realize, these Southern states, that now that Lincoln is in charge, the survival of their entire society as it exists is possibly now at stake. Okay. This just shows you kind of an electoral college map of what it looked like for Lincoln. Okay. Again, he didn't even win the popular vote, kind of 50% or more of the popular vote, only about 40%. But he did sweep all those northern states like they realized and understood, as well as Oregon and California, which were states by this point. Many of these kind of states out west were not yet organized as states, so they don't quite have the kind of, that advantage when it comes to casting votes for the Electoral College. Again, as you can see, the South mostly all coalesces around Douglas, but these kind of more border states going Breckinridge's way splits the vote, and as I said, makes it much easier for Lincoln to win the Electoral College vote, right? So again, this is pretty decisive, and these Southern states are now terrified because Lincoln's in the White House. Lincoln represents the Republican Party, and in their eyes, that means that their whole slave society is now at risk. So where does secession start? As you can imagine, as you could maybe predict, it starts in South Carolina, right? South Carolina was when all those calls for secession had happened in 1832 during the whole nullification crisis when Jackson was president, right? So nearly 30 years later, you can bet they're going to be the first ones to break away. Now, during this whole time, South Carolina had been widely been kind of this bastion of anti-Northern and secessionist and pro-secessionist attitudes. They're very intense there in South Carolina. They organized a convention that voted unanimously to support an ordinance of secession. So South Carolina is the very first. By September 1st of 1861, 6 other states in the lower South, ranging from Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas, all vote to secede. Okay. Now, this is something I really want to emphasize about these first states to secede. South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, they're all further away, right? They're not right there on those border areas that where the first shots are going to be fired, right? They are going to be much further away, right? Which kind of makes it easier for them to talk tough. Almost imagine it like, you got two groups that are getting ready to maybe fight one another. It's always easier for the people in the back to kind of shout insults and shout kind of the worst things in the world. But the people that are up front on either end, right, they're the ones maybe trying to calm tensions, right? And they're both trying to defend those who are coming further from the back, right? And the same could be said for the North, right? States like New York, states like Massachusetts that are further away from the Mason-Dixon line where really it's going to split between North and South, those are going to be very crucial when it comes to raising the temperatures, right? Those ones that are further away on either end, they really go a long, long way to raising the temperatures of North and South. Okay, so it's very easy, again, for these states that are a little bit further back away from the border areas to kind of talk their crap and get real kind of agitated and mad. And certainly that's true here, what we see here. And again, as I've said, I've emphasized this in class a little bit. Many of the men who are a part of these secessionist plans think of themselves as the natural next step of the American Revolution, right? They thought that many of them, their fathers or grandfathers had fought in the American Revolution, and they saw it that they were the next generation who were still following that revolutionary path, right? So they thought that they kind of had God and history on their side in that way. And so that's one big reason why, again, they have this proud military tradition that goes all the way back to the American Revolution. And it's certainly going to be one of those big reasons why a lot of these states resist and secede. And so Congress is going to try to compromise, the Congress in, Washington, D.C., but these secessionists are ignoring all these pleas, and they're even going as far as to actually starting to seize federal property, including arsenals and forts in their own particular states, so they can not only kind of tamp down and get control of some of the men there, convert them to being kind of Confederate army members, but also all the weapons that are there in those states, that they want to make sure they have those and forts and they have bases, that they're all ready to go. Okay, so again, they're starting to seize a lot of federal property within their own states just to make sure that they are ready for where this is all headed. Okay. So, as I said about these border areas, that's what makes Virginia so much of an important swing area with regards to this, okay? Because Virginia, they were a slave state, but they were technically still in the Union, right? And then again, Virginia is kind of in the northern South, right? So, they have slavery there, but it's not as harsh as some of these other areas, and so they're very particularly torn about this. And again, Virginia incredibly close, right basically beside Washington D.C. So how Virginia falls in this is going to play a very crucial, decisive, important role. And in Virginia, they try to propose a peace conference where delegates from 21 states attend, but unfortunately, no southern states attend this. And they met for 3 weeks, but nothing really happened. So again, Virginia is a slave state, but they're still technically a part of the Union during this time. But delegates from a lot of these seceding states, which again, that goes back to all these states here: South Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas, they all get together and meet in Montgomery, Alabama. And they officially here declare themselves the Confederate States of America, or the Confederacy. So this is, we don't think of it this way as much now. But at the time, they truly considered this to be their own very new nation. They thought they were forming their own nation out of the ashes of a former America to kind of preserve their way of life. That was their big deal, okay? And even their Constitution that they wrote in Montgomery is largely based out off of that of the U.S., with some key differences. One big thing, it gave many more states rights. And this had been, again, one of those big sticking points going all the way back to the anti-federalist days, right? That a lot of these states wanted more rights for themselves, so they made each state much more independent and had many more rights than they had previously had in the United States. Also, slavery, they made sure to guarantee throughout the Confederate territory into perpetuity, right? They banned international slave importation, though, because they had enough slaves in the Confederacy. They didn't need to import anymore. Protective tariffs as well. And they actually limited the presidency to a single 6-year term, which means that the president can only be elected once, and they're going to end up serving for 6 years. And the natural choice for this is Jefferson Davis, who I've talked about a little bit already. And you've kind of done an assignment where you looked up some stuff about him. He's a former senator from Mississippi. He's going to be the president of the Confederate States of America, the only president they have. And he says in his inaugural address, makes it very clear, the time for compromise has now passed. The South is determined to make all who oppose her smell Southern power and feel Southern steel, right? He is very decisive about, we have put up with enough for so long, and now we're going to kind of enact our own survival for the sake of us and the Confederacy. And I just want to make it clear here, oftentimes it's up for debate. What was the big reason for why this all happened and what it was all coming to? You can read all these state constitutions. You can go back and read the Constitution of the Confederate States of America. Let me make it perfectly clear. All of this ties to slavery. Okay, now it wasn't even that the North was trying to abolish slavery, but the South was fighting tooth and nail to make sure their slavery, their way of life, was preserved. Okay, so that's very much in. You can go back and read the Confederate State Constitution. You can read these individual state constitutions or these ordinances of secession. It's all about guaranteeing slavery in their territories. Okay, so again, that is really not up for debate. Now, there's other things up the Civil War that's up for debate, but pretty clearly, slavery is the primary cause of the Civil War. Okay, so Lincoln, he takes office officially March 4th, 1861, and he makes his address kind of specifically to Southern states. And he repeated his commitment to not interfere in Southern slavery, but said, hey, we do need to make sure this Union stays together. Again, Lincoln and the Republican Party were much more concerned with being free soilers, right? Preserving freedom in the Western states. They were actually willing to preserve slavery in the South. But the fact that all these Southern states are breaking away due to that fear, due to that anxiety they felt, that is going to cause Lincoln to say, hey, we need to stay together. And if you're not willing to stay together, I'm willing to send federal troops down there to make sure that we do stay together. So again, he doesn't exactly threaten Southern states, but he does affirm this is the United States of America. And what's going on in the South of your seizure of federal property, that's not going to go unavenged. Okay, so on April of 1861, Lincoln announces his intention to resupply Fort Sumter in Charleston. Okay, so Fort Sumter's, that's right off the coast of Charleston. And he says, listen, I'm going to resupply this fort. It hadn't been done for a while. And Jefferson Davis of the Confederacy decides, hey, let's capture this fort before the munitions get there to send a message to Lincoln, to send a message to the Union. Okay, so the U.S. Major that was there, Robert Anderson, he's the fort commander. He's going to be surrounded by Confederate forces and asked to surrender. He refuses. Then proceeds this 33-hour bombardment of Fort Sumter that naturally, eventually, Anderson is going to surrender to. Okay, now only one Union soldier is going to die on this, but this very decisively in April of 1861 kicks off officially the Civil War. Okay, because Lincoln naturally, he sees this as a provocation. He says, listen, the South has already started to organize these militias, these kind of both local, these statewide, and then this Confederacy-sized militia. I'm going to need volunteers as well. And so he calls on volunteers, 75,000 of those, to serve in the military for only, and this is the kicker, 90 days. He thinks that this thing's only going to last about 90 days. It's just going to be quick. And that's an opinion held by many in the North as well. Okay, so Lincoln and many of these other Northerners believe this is not going to be a war that's going to last all that long. Only 90 days. Turns out it's going to last about 4 years. They really had no idea the severity of what they were getting into. Okay, so this creates a crisis for those upper southern states, right? They didn't want to secede, but they also don't want to leave behind the South. So those upper southern states, like say North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, they're kind of they're part of the South, but they're a little bit on the more northern end, and they don't want to, they can part of the Union, but they don't really want to succeed, and they don't want to leave the South behind as well. So it really creates a conundrum for the upper southern states. So Virginia is going to make the big step, though, themselves and pass an ordinance of secession on April 17th of 1861 in solidarity with their southern brethren. And the Confederate Congress is then going to vote to move the Confederate capital from Montgomery, Mississippi, or Montgomery, Alabama, to Richmond, Virginia. Okay. And pretty quickly, not that long after, a lot of the other states are going to also break away. In early June of 1861, Arkansas, which was much further south, but then a little bit further north, North Carolina and Tennessee are going to be among the last states to secede. Okay. Everyone else, border states, Delaware is going to be safely in the Union. They're not going to leave. Maryland's going to be tricky because Maryland is one of those states right on the border that nobody's really sure which direction they're going to do. Lincoln realizes I need to preserve Maryland. If I've lost Virginia, I need to keep Maryland because Maryland and Virginia are right surrounding D.C. And if the South or the Confederacy takes over Maryland, that means they could surround D.C. much easier. So Lincoln's going to take some pretty severe steps when he imposes martial law on the state of Maryland, basically militarily controls Baltimore in particular to prevent secession, and is even going to go as far as to imprison suspected secessionist leaders, throw them behind bars, and basically throw away the key. Okay, Kentucky, meanwhile, is also in a weird state. It's going to be divided. Where those on the southern bank, control of that region is going to be very strategically important as far as transitioning troops north and south, either direction, right? So Kentucky is in a weird spot. It actually declares itself neutral until the Confederacy occupies part of the state, where promptly the Union troops are going to be sent in. Okay. Missouri, meanwhile, they have strong Southern sympathies. Again, Missouri going all the way back to 1820, the Missouri Compromise. They go back way, way, way far back when it comes to kind of debates about slavery. But they do get a state convention together and vote almost unanimously against secession, so Missouri is going to stay in the Union with support of Union forces there. Okay, so the battle lines have been drawn. Okay, all these southern states here now represent this new Confederacy of Confederate States of America. Meanwhile, all these green states here are going to represent the Union, right? The Union, the original United States in some ways, right? Meanwhile, these border states kind of Kentucky, Missouri, Maryland, Delaware, they all kind of sit at a crossroads, right? And a lot of battles of the Civil War are going to take place along this general area. Okay, so the war is officially kicked off. Fort Sumter was, again, the first time that Confederacy really made a kind of a daring provocation towards the Union, and now we're off to the races. And again, Lincoln and many in the North suspected this is only going to be a war that lasts maybe 90 days, maybe a year, but in reality, it's going to last 4 years. We'll talk about why they thought that going into it tomorrow, as well as what was done to further make that war go on longer than it needed or should have. Okay, so this is Mr. Huffman signing off today. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, and take care. God bless.